Before I tell you how a power-drunk HOA Karen tried to ruin my life and ended up in handcuffs while screaming in disbelief, make sure you subscribe right now, because stories like this don't just entertain. They remind you why standing up for yourself is so important. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happened the day my son revealed his badge and arrested the very woman who thought she was untouchable. It all began when I moved into what I thought was my dream neighborhood, a quiet cul-de-sac with freshly painted houses, manicured lawns, and neighbors who at first glance seemed friendly, but behind the white picket fences and carefully trimmed hedges lurked an HOA run by none other than Karen, a woman whose entire existence revolved around controlling everyone else's lives, the kind of person who would measure your grass with a ruler, fine you for leaving your trash bin out 10 minutes too long, and send threatening letters if your mailbox paint didn't match her personal standards. And at first I tried to play along, thinking maybe this was just how the neighborhood worked, maybe this was the price of peace and quiet. But soon it became clear that Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was enforcing power, and anyone who dared question her authority became her enemy. And it wasn't long before I was on her radar. It started with small things, a nasty note about the color of my shutters, a fine for having my son's car parked in the driveway instead of inside the garage, then escalated into constant harassment, demands for money, threats of legal action, and endless gossip spread to turn neighbors against me. And when I finally decided enough was enough and announced I was pulling out of the HOA, that's when Karen snapped, acting as if I had committed treason, calling emergency meetings, sending letters full of legal jargon, and even showing up at my doorstep yelling that I had no right to disobey her authority. And I laughed at first, thinking she'd eventually get bored and move on, but I underestimated just how deep her obsession with control went, because one evening, after I mowed my lawn in what she claimed was an unapproved pattern, Karen actually called the cops, screaming into the phone that I was a danger to the neighborhood, a criminal violating community codes. And as blue and red lights lit up the street, my stomach sank. Not because I was afraid of being in trouble, but because I knew this was Karen's final weapon, her attempt to humiliate me in front of everyone. But what she didn't know was that my son, who happened to be visiting that weekend, was a police officer. And as the patrol car pulled up, my son calmly stepped forward, pulled out his badge, and introduced himself to the responding officer, explaining the situation with the calm authority of someone who knew the law inside and out. And the look on Karen's face when she realized my son wasn't just another neighbor but an officer of the law himself was priceless, a mix of shock, rage, and disbelief as she sputtered about abuse of power and special treatment. But the real twist came when the officer who responded asked my son if he wanted to file charges against Karen for making a false report, harassment, and disorderly conduct, and my son, with a steady voice that carried through the entire cul-de-sac, said yes. And suddenly the hunter became the hunted, the woman who lived off intimidation now standing on the curb with handcuffs clicking around her wrists while neighbors peeked from behind blinds and cracked open doors, recording videos on their phones as Karen screamed that this was all a mistake, that she was the victim, that she was just doing her duty as HOA president. But the more she yelled, the deeper she buried herself, refusing to calm down, jerking against the officer's grip, shouting insults at me and my son until finally the officer read her rights, and silence fell over the street except for her wailing. And in that moment I felt a mix of vindication and relief, because for once justice was actually being served. But the story didn't end there, because Karen being Karen, she tried to fight the charges in court, showing up with binders full of irrelevant HOA bylaws, claiming she was within her rights to police my property even though I had legally withdrawn from the association. And my son, professional and unshakable, laid out every instance of harassment, every false report, every time she crossed the line. And the judge, visibly irritated by her theatrics, not only dismissed her claims but ordered her to pay fines, legal fees, and even undergo mandatory counseling for her obsessive behavior. And while she stormed out of the courtroom swearing revenge, her power in the neighborhood was gone. The HOA voted her out, and suddenly the street that once felt suffocating was alive with barbecues, friendly waves, and laughter again, as if Karen's departure lifted a curse. And though she still lives somewhere nearby, occasionally glaring when she drives past, she has no more authority, no more power, just the memory of being the queen of a castle built on fear, dethroned the moment she picked a fight with the wrong family. And every time I see my son's badge glint in the sunlight, I remember the exact moment Karen realized her reign was over, and I can't help but smile knowing that in the end, justice wasn't just poetic, it was personal, and if you've ever dealt with a Karen in your life, you know exactly how satisfying it is to see one finally face the consequences of their own arrogance. So subscribe for more, because this story is only one of many where the tables turn, the bullies fall, and the people who thought they were powerless discover that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth shine through.